So before I start, just a couple of intros. My parents, against probably their better judgment, decided to come and see this. They left the beach. I have no idea why you would do that anyway. So thanks for being here. And then I also want to introduce Bastian Unterberg. He's one of the people that I interviewed. He's based here in Berlin. We've had a lot of interesting conversations, so he's going to keep me honest as he's featured prominently in the presentation. So this is the title of my thesis, Causing Mass Collaboration. But actually what I'd like you to leave with is the idea that instead of asking customers to buy things, we should be asking them for a lot of other things. So in terms of structure, I'm going to try and explain to you why I think you should care about this. We're going to talk a little bit about outcomes, so basically what has been done with mass collaboration. We're going to talk about sort of three main areas that I think need to work in order for mass collaboration to work. That is, the people involved, the tools used, and ultimately the way everything is organized. And then I'll summarize with what we'll call the Octo 10, which is, I think, just 10 ideas on how to evaluate mass collaboration. And then finally talk a little bit about what's next. So Google's SEC filing says that there are about 10,000 people who work for them. And I'm going to argue that this week probably a few of us have worked for them. We don't get a paycheck. And the reason is every time we create a link, we help them essentially provide search services. There's really no way for their company to exist without the links that everyone else outside the organization creates. Not possible. And then I would argue that some of us helped make Amazon about $3 billion last year. And again, we didn't get a paycheck. We may have bought something from them. But the way in which this happened is it's estimated that about 20% of their sales come from people who read reviews directly. And so this is one way in which they refine the quality of reviews and increase the number of purchases. So it's a very simple question. If you answer this question, if you wrote a review, you've done some work for Amazon that made them that much money in 2008. And then lastly, Craigslist, I think a lot of us have used, but it's 35 people. 35 people. I have 50 million people a month just in the US coming to their site. And I think the most important thing here is that they didn't try and approve the ads. They left that up to the people who use the service to do. And I would argue in the end actually have killed the news business in part because they took away their classified revenue. So what do I think is going on and what sort of I think is interesting about this? Well, most of us talk about organizations as this sort of red group. So we operate in an environment. That environment is all these other people that don't work for the organization. And some of them are suppliers, other people that have special relationships with us. Those would be the people in the gray. And so this is not really new. Lots of us talk about collaboration with the supply chain. We talk about collaboration that are formalized in some way. But this is new, right? Inviting everyone in to be part of creative processes that used to just happen inside the organization. And so I think we've talked about three outcomes, but I looked at probably about 50. And the most important ones are probably the 12 that are clear market leaders. Like you can look at the market and say these people dominate. There's no question about Google, Amazon is up there. But the challenge with this is that this is relatively young. The things that enable mass collaboration are relatively new. So I had to find some other things and cheat a little. I'll call it cheating. But basically, these are all valuable steps that ultimately I think enable you to get to a market leadership position. And so I'm taking these, if you can achieve these outcomes, they're also important. So the other examples are made out of people who change the economics of a process. Right? So P&G, for example, when they go to market for Being Girl, which is one of their recent campaigns, they estimate that was 4 times more efficient than their traditional advertising campaign. So I've got that as an example. I've got people doing better communications. I interviewed someone from New Line who launched Lord of the Rings. It's a qualitative field, but his feel is that without working with the community, it would have been a much more expensive and probably less fruitful exercise. So I'm going to go into 3 examples, and this is one of them. Very big number of page views. 2006, very short time frame. This is insane. I mean, I see stuff like this. If I didn't know some of the people around the company, I wouldn't believe the numbers. And I'm going to show you why this was achieved with mass collaboration. This is Bastian, who I introduced at the beginning. He runs Javoto. He founded it. He has about 5,000 creatives in a community that work with him. And as I'll show you, they generate a lot of ideas very efficiently. And then finally, we'll look at a Japanese band who really didn't have a budget and has made good using mass collaboration. So in interviewing and looking at these communities, I'm going to share with you some of the things that I think are salient about the people dimension. So we talk a lot about sort of money and remuneration and why do people work, and there's got to be something in it for them. And the most important things for me were actually, I think, what I'll call ego boo, which is anything that relates to the ego and boosting the ego, reputation, status, any of those types of things. And sure, people do that. Sunil was kind enough to point out that social time is important, and I think I've managed to verify that. And then finally, a number of people have touched on this, but meaning is not insignificant. People want to know why. And when something is important enough, they'll spend time doing it. And we might look at it and say, well, normally we associate this with people hanging out on the weekend, or really it's not work, but the tasks actually have value and add up to work. And so Gordon Patterson launched in 1999 the first Lord of the Rings movie. He now is going to be continuing to work with Peter Jackson. And he went out to the 60 people who ran the major fan sites and essentially asked them for permission to create the movie. And his point is that people are very clear about what they want. And he spent 6 months just listening to what people want. And it seems like a simple thing, but he was 6 months. He's the head of marketing for New Line. And this was his plan. Go and listen to people for 6 months. And so what I found is, and there's a bunch of research that points to this, I think Sunil touched on it, there's a lot of people who are highly valuable. If I took sort of 1 in 100, there's a person who submits the idea, that uploads the video, that writes the blog, that does all the things that are very visible outputs when they interact. And then there's a smaller group of, say, 9 out of every 100 that are rating and commenting and reviewing. And again, very visible contributions, but not as much as the one. And then there's a group of 90 people who are often looked at as sort of less valuable because, passive masses, they're sort of just hanging out viewing things. But I think all these people add something different. If I was looking at an idea and I saw the most viewed idea, that's still meaningful. So these people don't even know that they're doing work, and yet it yields some insight. And so ultimately, through these interactions, where there's no financial exchange, other things are being exchanged, whether it's points or ratings or rank, or in Bastian's case, karma. These are the currencies of social interaction. People are participating for these reasons. And the important thing for me is that they actually yield economic value. So there's some translation of all this stuff into some economic value. So we'll have a look at Javoto first. They're 10 people. They founded in 2007. Happily, they're profitable, which we like. And I think we mentioned they already have 5,000 creatives, and these are some of their clients. This was an idea that I submitted. So part of the research, I participated in a few of the communities. In this case, a lot. So I submitted an idea for a competition. So I would be the one. I wasn't the best one, but I was the one. In this case, there were a larger group of people who then rated. I didn't actually get such a good rating, but they rated the idea. But what was most interesting to me was this, which is, I'm feeling pretty good. People are saying nice things about the idea. They love short stories. It was all sort of nice, but then someone said, oh, that's interesting. You should be able to, as the owner, contribute to the story, which is not something that I'd put in the original idea. And so we started a conversation, and this happened multiple times. And that to me is, the exchange here is purely social, but the value in terms of my idea is just going up. So on Javoto, they sort of highlight this in two ways. People actually earn money for the best ideas. If you win, there's a prize. And then if the person who puts out the creative brief wants to use the idea, they have to license it. So there's money. So these are profiles. This is money that they've earned. But it's not just about that, because these people also have karma. And this is a representation of how much they interact. right, or how much they're interacting with the community. And so you can't get karma if you're not leaving feedback and you're not getting ratings. And so these things are sort of essential together to make this work. So let's talk a little bit about tools. This is sort of a common issue throughout a lot of mass collaboration. It relies a lot on technology and tools. And I think most people's response to this is if you can sort of magically get this thing to align, then you will have mass collaboration and just stand back and watch it work. And I think it has a critical role, but it's not the only thing. And so Craig Newmark, I think, describes this very nicely. He says a good tool is one that people want to use, they will use, and is simple. It seems really easy to do, but it's amazing how few people can actually do this. And we'll get back to his last two parts of the comment in terms of how tools respond to dialogue and how they change to ensure that they're still useful and relevant. And so one of the ideas around tools that I think is essential is creating unwork, right? So the easier I can make it for someone to do something, it just stops feeling like work. In this case, I'm saving myself some searches because Google is anticipating what I'm trying to do. And I think that's an essential element of tools. But it doesn't all have to be utility, right? So when you look at how the latest Batman movie was promoted, there was a game called Why So Serious, which involved a large number of people participating for free. And the benefit to the Batman franchise was that this made news. There were people lining up on the street with placards sort of voting for imaginary characters in a movie. And so it doesn't just have to be about the utility of Google, but there are other ways to achieve unwork. The people who created this value were playing a game, but it was real exposure for Warner Brothers. The other idea is communication scaffolding. And so the concept here is that you don't build the communication by yourself, you build the things that enable communication. And so the Obama campaign, David Plouffe, towards the end said they were really surprised at how many people came to them and said explicitly, I need help making this point. Can you create video to help me make this point? And we do this all the time, right? We present and we refer to things. It's hard to have a conversation where you don't pull in something. And so you can make those things, right? And the same applies to the Apple Store. The Apple Store is ultimately scaffolding. They don't do the heavy lifting of writing applications anymore. But they do provide an easy way to sell and market and get paid. So, again, it's scaffolding. And the last thing that's easy to overlook is how much data we generate every day. In this case, it's mobile phone data that has some value. And in this case, it's, depending on what you think about San Francisco, this is where everyone is right now, well, when I took the snapshot. And it sort of gives you an indication of where people are in the world. Now, no one here is explicitly saying, let me help you figure out where everyone is. They just have their phone. And so I think that's an important thing. Again, the level of effort to contribute is almost zero. Okay, so WordPress, I showed you there was the sort of huge growth curve, and interviewed them. 36 people, again, very small, not that old. 200 million readers, which is not that interesting maybe, compared to the 7 million bloggers, but still, they also have these clients. They have many more, but they have some really large clients. The interesting thing about WordPress is that this is the guy who wrote the first version, and people look at him and say, this is a great developer. But what he's a master at is creating communication scaffolding. Right? So he creates video, he takes positions on things, he makes it really easy as a developer to go and stand in front of a client and say, here's what Matt had to say. I may not be able to describe it as eloquently, but Matt said this. And he gets used a lot in that way. And then the WordCamp Vegas is a live event. It's a place where people can get together. And we'll get back to why live events are actually important. Ultimately, if the relationships being formed online don't translate offline, they're probably not that good. The scaffolding idea, again, in the form of designers. So designers don't want to have to write code to contribute to a blog. So they've made it really easy for designers to contribute. But what it means for me, as someone who's coming in and doesn't know anything about design, I can start writing a blog, and I have a library of stuff that I can use immediately. So they've taken the concept from both directions. They made it easy for designers to contribute. They made it really easy for bloggers to leverage that into their blogs. And then finally, the invisible data that has value, and a great insight here. When people submit requests for support, WordPress figured out that people essentially abandon communities at a certain point, but if they don't get a response in 2 hours, they tend to get upset. And so they surface this so that anyone else can jump in and help. So they highlight, they say, these are special people, no one's talked to them yet, please help them. And so again, a simple idea from sort of data that may have been thrown away that they're using in a useful way. And then the last is fetch. So I don't know for the people who speak Yiddish, this was kind of funny, but they encourage people to whine or complain about what they don't like, and they celebrate it. And so Craig's Newmark's points about tools being responsive and adjusting to what's not working, they've made this front and center of how they manage their community or how they work with their community. And finally, Ranan, who I interviewed, I thought this was interesting. He talks about happiness engineers. That's their title. Those people are empowered to adjust the tool to work better for people. They don't call them product managers. They're not market research people. They can go in, and when they see a problem, they're empowered to fix it. I don't know how people landed up here again. But anyway, this is organization. And so we've talked a lot about alignment. And so now I can tell you it's not just Doug, although I appreciate and look for alignment. Jake ran Lego's online community. And this was his insight. He goes around and works with a lot of large online communities. And all he talks about is how organizations get what they want, the community gets what they want, and everyone goes home happy. And for me, I think that's sort of a good way to think about alignment. And then, as you know, my favorite person in the world. So Jeff talks about losing control. I just think about this as sort of embracing letting go. And so that manifests itself in this. And Ricky, I think, talked a lot about this, but sometimes you're writing and sometimes you're not. Right? So someone's got to be up in the air and someone's got to be moving you along. And for me, this is, you know, a way of thinking about that. Our other famous friends, you know, I really, this was interesting because it forced me to think a lot about this point, which is camel is a horse designed by committee. And I think my response to that is you really have to decide how to decide. And when you push on this, Wikipedia is not a democracy. You have to go a long way to raise an issue that people will vote on. And so there's a small group of people that make decisions, and it's definitely not a democracy. So I think that's how you avoid getting too many camels out of the process. And then, you know, I think in terms of scale, as you include more people, you have to manage the trolls. The trolls are the people that try and undermine the work that you're doing. They try and undermine the community. They try and make people feel uncomfortable. They just generally cause trouble. And so you need some framework in a community to avoid giving any power to the trolls. You can ban them. There's lots of techniques, but basically you always need some mechanism to keep some people out. And so for the last part, I'd like to show you how this band with no budget achieved something I think quite wonderful. And I'm not going to talk over their work, so I'll just let them sort of show you what they did.
So to 水たまりが髪に映る心は日々の音色抜けた君の音色 ポテクノラで判断する価値の何々 Just what 僕が手振りのも大切なものは何わっとはこかと仕掛きせずにあれやこれ何色のメロディー戸惑う時も投げ出してポテクノラで判断する価値の何々 Just what 僕が手振りのも今何を思うの全ての違いを受け入れたら虹色に輝く空を指す水たまり鏡に映る心は日々の音色抜けた君の音色澄んだ気持ちのせいだ気にすることなんかないよこのまま行こう全ての違いを受け入れたら虹色に輝く雨ばかりの空きっと水たまり鏡に映る心は気持ちのせいだ虹色に輝いて君の音色君の音色抜けて話せる君の音色
Alright, so what's interesting is that so they did that it took them 3 months, and about 2 months was just set up, just planning and trying to figure out which tasks they were going to do and what they could ask people, what was reasonable to ask people to do. So, and that's kind of interesting, is just how much organizing this can take. So just to recap, on the people side, understand what stakeholders want. So this is just a question of listening and figuring out what the community do you want to work with, what do they want, what can they do. So this is the 1, 9, 90. So you'll have your 1% who do a lot, the 9% who do a little bit less but still have value, and then the 90% that often people struggle with in terms of figuring out value, but there's always a way to get something, whether it's just number of views or something. Even if those people don't know that they're doing anything, there's some data that they generate that's useful. And then create non-economic currencies. So make sure that there's some way for people to exchange value and recognize people who are doing a lot. So that ultimately, if you intend to get any economic value, you need to have some sort of non-economic currency. So on the tool side, we talked about creating unwork. And so this is, again, the idea that it doesn't feel like work, or it doesn't take that much work to do something. So if I'm going to contribute, it's far more likely that I'll contribute more if it doesn't feel like work. And the other important thing is scaffolding. So in other words, rather than thinking about building the whole piece of communication or the whole application, think about what parts are difficult and fill those in versus trying to do everything. Don't forget to look at the data shadows. So this is just the idea that through any interaction, given how much is taking place online, there's going to be some data that you can look at. So in the WordPress example, they were just using that to do customer support. So no one was really telling them anything, but when they looked at the data, they could figure out who wasn't being helped in a timely way. And then the last category is all organization related, and this, the most important idea is probably alignment, and that is that whatever people would like to get, whatever they want is something that they're getting, and whatever the organization wants is something that they're getting. And if you can balance those two needs, then you have the right environment. Embracing letting go, and so this is the idea that there's far less control, just because these are not people that work for you. And so you have to get used to the idea that the leadership role is different. There's less control, and so the people that are succeeding in this are comfortable with the idea that there may not even be a traditional leadership role in this environment. Decide how to decide. Critical when thinking about how to work with so many people, again, is that not everyone's going to be able to vote. It's just not reasonable. It's not a good structure. And so you may still come back to ideas like a jury, it may be a single decision maker, but you've got to decide how you want to make decisions. And then the last is don't feed the trolls. And so, of course, when you open up and you've got a different type of relationship with the broader community, you have to deal with people that are going to try and undermine, for whatever reason, the process. And so what's next? Probably the hardest question that is still unresolved is just what's the right ownership structure. So if you have all these people contributing, there's the formal sort of patent or right reserved approach, and that works fine. P&G do that, Google does that. There are lots of organizations that still manage to get contributions without giving up ownership. But at the same time, there's a lot of organizations that have found ways to create different forms of ownership. So whether it's open source or it's Creative Commons, there is some sense that if you contribute to those things, somehow it's more fair. I'm not exactly sure why, but it seems like the more that organizations ask for outside contributions, the more people are going to look at how people make money and how they benefit from those contributions and figure out what's fair. And so if I feel like, I have more of a stake and the ownership model better fits what I'm doing, I'm more likely to contribute. So I don't know where this goes, but there was, it seems like people are using both types of ownership or a range of ownership models, and they're all working for the moment. Beta Cup is a project to try out a lot of these ideas. So taking the latest set of ideas and trying to apply it to a real world problem. And in this case, it's redesigning coffee cups. And so the disposable coffee cup is something that has a lot of shortcomings. It's very convenient, but it creates a lot of landfill because it's not recyclable. And so we're going to take the core ideas from mass collaboration and try and fix that. And then the last is, simply to join us at collaboratory.org. We'd love to work with you. And so we're encouraging anyone that we work with to contribute to the framework and help to make it better. So in other words, we're trying to use the framework on the framework. And then final message, if you've got nothing else and you slept through everything, we're not customers, we're collaborators. And so I think if you just switch gears a little bit and think about people that way, you land up with very different ways in which you might interact with them. So you wouldn't always be selling to people. You'd be trying to figure out what they can do with you, right? Whether it's generating ideas or voting or giving you feedback, it just changes the perception of what a customer is and what people are in terms of communications.